This here is another viewer's broken gaming PC. And yes, I know, I need a haircut. So this tiny rig comes to us from a Central Florida local running Pop! OS, which is actually a Linux distro, so it's not Windows like you normally see in this playlist, though that really shouldn't matter here because the real issue with it is that it doesn't send a signal out. That means it should still in theory power up, we should see lights, fans spin, but once we connect a monitor, we get nothing on the display. The owner said that this was working perfectly fine. At one point he reset the system, and from then on, for whatever reason, again, he no longer could get anything on screen, and he did note a white VGA light illuminating on the board after all of this happened. Now, most folks don't have a ton of hardware laying around to troubleshoot with, and that's what puts us in a unique position. We can usually knock these out fairly quick because we have an entire closet full of stuff for this very reason. But the owner suspected either a graphics card or a riser issue. And if you recall, the NZXT H1 in its early years did suffer from a pretty serious riser problem wherein multiple power planes could be punctured by metal screws, shorting and causing damage to other components or even potentially house fires. And so they sent out a half measure, more or less, like issuing nylon screws to folks. Here, just replace these metal screws with nylon screws, so if you do happen to puncture the power plane, you won't actually cause any severe damage. And that was very quickly overruled by what I believe to be the correct solution, which was completely redesigning the PCI riser such that using metal screws, which most folks do, wouldn't actually cause any severe damage when tightened properly. And this was covered extensively by Gamers Nexus. I'm gonna have this link below in the description if you wanna catch yourself up to speed there. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. So that's why the owner suspects there may be a riser issue. He didn't have an extra riser to test with on hand, and he also didn't have an extra graphics card, and he doesn't believe that there's integrated graphics in the CPU. So, you know, what really can you do there? That's why it's in the office, and I believe we can get to the bottom of this one fairly quick. Famous last words, am I right? I hope you will stay with me.
Are you sitting on a gaming PC without an activated copy of Windows? Forget $100+ retail keys, instead snag an OEM Windows 11 key for a fraction of the price to unlock the full potential of the OS. Oh, and don't worry, they'll still remove those pesky activation watermarks. Just click the links below to get started today, and be sure to use our special offer code SKGS for a sweet discount on a variety of options including Windows 11 Pro, Home, and more.
Hello there, and welcome to Fix or Flop, a playlist where we attempt to fix broken gaming PCs in and around the Orlando, Florida area for free. So if you or someone you know has a system that doesn't power up or maybe doesn't send a signal to a monitor, as is the case here, maybe submit a form. It's linked in the video description. We'll charge you $0.00. That includes labor and any potential replacement hardware. And that's only because we can monetize on sites like YouTube. Thank you so much for clicking on these videos. It's why this exists in the first place. You guys are awesome. This is such a cool position to be in, to be able to help folks out, and I don't leave anything out. If I make a mistake, if I travel down a rabbit hole that I shouldn't, that will be included in the video. I want you to learn from my mistakes. You can learn so much more by screwing up than you can just by doing it right. This is supposed to be educational, but I understand there's a bit of an entertainment factor as well, watching me make a fool of myself sometimes. I do think that this one's gonna be fairly straightforward. The first thing we're gonna do is try to power it on to see if we do get that signal. Since everything connects underneath, I'm just gonna lay the case down temporarily on its side. You don't wanna do this long term because I think the graphics card, is down here. So it's gonna try to pull in air from a solid table. That's not gonna work out. So just FYI there. All right, so it does power on. That's nice. We're just looking for a signal out. If we get one, then I would say we've probably got an issue with, we're in recovery. Okay, it says something needs to be repaired. The fact that we have signal out is interesting because we weren't getting that before. Well, I should clarify, supposedly the owner wasn't getting that before, and I can't imagine someone would waste their time to drive all the way out to drop a system off if they were lying about it, sending a picture out. I'm not just gonna replace stuff if it's not broken. But you can see if I click enter to try to reset the system, it jumps straight back into the recovery environment. We can change some startup settings by clicking F8, but I don't think that's gonna get us very far. See, this is a Windows recovery environment. I thought we had Linux on this boot drive. So let's try escape for the BIOS. Let's see if we can get in there. Maybe he has like a trace or two of Windows on some other drive in the machine if he has more than one. That could explain why it's a bit confused and why it's not booting up smoothly. Let's hope we can get into the BIOS. Okay, I think, yep, okay, great. All right, so this is a good start. You can see there's an Intel Core i5-10400F in here. The owner wasn't totally sure about specs because it was a pre-built when he bought it, and it was several years ago. This is an F SKU, which means it doesn't have integrated graphics, which means the owner couldn't have just removed the discrete card, assuming that there was an issue with it, to test for a post, because you won't get display out with this particular SKU. Wow, the memory in here, he has 64 gigs of DDR4. That's pretty good. And then it looks like temperatures across the board are decent. This is a case that tends to run fairly hot considering it only has 120 mil AIO in it, but I don't see any issues here so far. I think what I'm gonna do is hop into the settings window, and then we'll swing down to boot, and it looks like we do have one hard drive in here that has a Windows partition. So it's likely the owner took the Linux drive out of this machine because it obviously wasn't working and put it somewhere else for safekeeping or to use in the meantime. And sure enough, that's what the owner has just confirmed. Now, the mystery behind all of this is why the owner was seeing that VGA light and not getting a picture out when we don't seem to have any trouble here. He tried both HDMI and display ports. Obviously, you have to switch cables to do that. So he tried multiple ports on his graphics card. I doubt multiple ports just suddenly went bad, and we happen to be using the one good one. In fact, there's only one HDMI port in this graphics card. It's an RTX 3060. So if that was in fact bad, we should be able to see that here. The other possibility on his side might be a defective monitor. Maybe his monitor died and that's why he wasn't getting a signal out. Sometimes if the computer in question realizes that there's an issue with a display, it'll throw that VGA light to say, hey, we're trying to send picture out, but there's nowhere to send it. That would also be the case if you didn't have a display cable connected at time of startup. So that's stuff that I really can't account for here. I'm gonna try my best to set up like a worst case scenario here. In fact, I'm just gonna do it while we're rolling. I'm gonna assume that maybe he had his system sitting upright. Is it possible that like the bend in the cable or something, or the flex in the card? I'm just kind of moving this around here. We don't have a problem so far. Is it possible we maybe have a pending temperature issue? And we would have to let the system run a bit longer, obviously, but you can see this has been slowly rising. In fact, it's probably going to in the next few seconds. It was at 58 degrees only 30 seconds ago. So it's possible we either have a pretty big air bubble in the AIO, or the pump is partially clogged, or the fin stack may be partially clogged. You can see, yeah, that is continuing to climb. I'm gonna let it do its thing for another 5 or 10 minutes to see where this actually thermally equalizes. Because at the end of the day, even if this system stopped at 63, or now it's 65 degrees Celsius, in basically an idle setting, that's still far too hot. Even for a crammed system, it shouldn't be in the mid 60s. The CPU is not doing anything right now. It is literally chilling. So it's possible that the AIO might be on its way out. And if that is the case, that may explain why the owner was seeing what he was seeing after, let's say, an extended, maybe he wasn't gaming on this Linux operating system, but let's say he was doing some intensive work or something, data crunching, and the CPU got very hot. Well, if it shuts down because it was thermal throttling, it probably won't restart for a good while until those temperatures settle. And if the owner was only troubleshooting when the CPU was still very hot, that could explain why he wasn't getting a picture out. It's kind of a shot in the dark, because if it thermal throttles, it'll almost always power right back up. It just might not power up for long. And it won't just stay powered up with no signal out. It will physically shut itself down to preserve itself. I don't know, this one's a bit weird. It's at 68 degrees Celsius now. Those temps keep climbing. A few minutes later, and it is still going up, though it is seemingly leveling off. This hasn't changed from 76 in about a minute and a half. So I think, let's say, somewhere around 80 degrees Celsius is where this thing is going to thermally equalize at idle, which means there's almost 100% chance that this rig overheats when it sustains any sort of moderate load. What I want to try doing for a quick fix is removing the side panels in this case. There is a bit of dust in the dust filters. If we clean that and then try to get some of the cables out of the way of the fan and radiator combo, it's possible we could alleviate a good amount of this. I'm gonna keep the system running while I begin disassembly to see if we see any real-time change in these temps. Now, for those wondering, a few things you have to do to get these panels off. Firstly, most of them just kind of pop off. There actually aren't any screws holding any of these panels in, but to get the white section of this off, you have to remove the front and rear sections first. So this tempered glass here, and then I'm trying to be delicate because this system is on again. And there actually is a hard drive in here, which I'll admit I wasn't really thinking much about when I flipped this case upright while it was running. That was stupid of me. I'll probably just throw in a free 2.5-inch SSD to make up for that. There's nothing important on this drive. Again, it's sort of like a placeholder at this point, but I'm not sure what I was thinking there. And we're gonna slide this off. So this is the big piece. And yeah, there's a bit of dust in here. It isn't terrible by any means. I don't expect this to really change much in the way at all of temperatures in my experience, but yeah, we'll give it a quick dusting. Now that is more like it. But would you look at that, even with the side panels off, you can see that's the back of the radiator right there. No problems at all. Temperatures are still not looking good. 77 degrees now, so they've actually gone up just a tad. Now, one other thing, you probably noticed I didn't do all that correctly. In fact, this was a big mistake, and I'm just now realizing it. When I had the system laying on its side, that effectively meant that the pump in this AIO was positioned higher than anything else, which is no good. There's naturally gonna be a bit of air in any closed loop like this for thermal expansion and other things. And if that air collects in the pump and that pump is running, it can run dry or run hot, and that could kill it prematurely. Now, this being a 5-year-old AIO, it's possible that's already happening. The owner did just disclose that he was seeing higher temperatures than normal, but he wasn't monitoring it very closely. So I don't think I changed the game here by doing what I did for a few seconds, but I do want to point out that I should not have done that, and I don't know why. I forgot that the pump was in the radiator with this AIO, which is a super niche thing. You don't usually see it this way. Typically with Asetek style pumps, the pump itself will be in the block, but here it's in the radiator because they were trying to circumvent some Asetek patent or something, and yeah, I did a no-no. I think what this is going to come down to, however, is a cooler swap. I think that this AIO is probably already due for either a replacement or an extensive service. I'm of the mindset that for this style case and for the positioning of the cooler, the way that it's built, it makes more sense to just switch to air cooling for peace of mind, and in my opinion, also more effective airflow and heat extraction. You also get a sense from this perspective just how crammed everything is behind the AIO and in front of the CPU. So the block for the chip would be about here, just behind this riser cable, and you got the tubes from the AIO, everything just kind of crushed up against the rear of this fan. I believe InsDXT set this to intake, so it's actually pulling fresh air in from outside, and you would think intuitively that makes a lot more sense, because where is it going to get fresh air from the inside if it's so crammed? The problem is airflow doesn't really work that way. So if you have a very restrictive rear, there's no place for this intake of air to really go. You have this large pressure differential. In fact, I can feel air just like squeaking out high velocities here on the edges, because this is really the only places for it to go, like top and bottom. And so because you have this pressure disparity, it actually weakens the fan's ability to pull air through an already fairly restrictive radiator on top of that. So I imagine if we had about 1 inch or 2's worth of space between the two, temperatures would drop fairly quickly. In fact, we can simulate that right now. So you can see we are still currently fairly toasty at 76 degrees Celsius, but what happens if I remove these 2 screws and fold the radiator on its side? This will free up a ton of space and allow for air to move unhindered. Look at that. It's actually a cool design. I don't think it's very efficient long term, but this way, the radiator and fan assembly will be able to pull in fresh air and exhaust it without obstruction. At least that was supposed to be the case. In a normal functioning AIO, you would expect these temps to drop pretty drastically. They've actually gone up by 1 degree Celsius, and I think I know why. Wow, our temps have actually gone up to 80 degrees Celsius since doing this. I expected this to result in the opposite result. And I think what's going on is this style AIO, where it's trying to circumvent an Asetek patent by putting the pump in the radiator, tends to clog prematurely. If the coolant mixture is off by just a little bit, because you're mixing copper and aluminum, right? Copper in the cold plate, typically, or some sort of like nickel-plated copper combo, and an aluminum fin stack, galvanic corrosion can quickly clog up a luke, especially in the micro fin stack of the block side of the AIO. And if you also don't correct for things like algae growth potential long term, you could also see a large buildup of gunk that affects coolant flow. And where it really begins to stack up is right here inside the block. There are tiny stacks of microfins intended to increase surface area and heat extraction that, when clogged, will actually drastically reduce the amount of coolant flowing through. And when you do this, it's a bit like lowering the pump speed, like in a normal functioning AIO. If you do this too much, to where coolant's not moving quickly enough, then the amount of heat being dumped into the system is outweighing the amount of heat being removed by the system in the radiator side of things. And so you get a temperature increase that tends to go up all the way to roughly T-junction. In this case, it's not terrible. I mean, it's bad, but it's not like T-junction bad at idle. We've seen it get very bad very quickly, almost like you don't even have a cooler attached. I think this is a slam dunk AIO replacement. No two ways about it. This block is mounted correctly. The fan obviously is spinning very loudly to try to accommodate, and I do feel coolant moving through the tubes, just not very strongly. It also wouldn't be a bad time to update this BIOS, which is several years old by this point. There have been several revisions, especially security and stability revisions since, that I think the owner will find handy. So we'll take care of that as well, since we're sort of deconstructing things. Now, AIO removal here is actually super straightforward. We're gonna disconnect the fan cable here, run this through. We've also got a pump cable. That's out of the way, and then just 4 screws holding this cold plate to the CPU. You can see we did have adequate thermal paste applied, even though it is probably several years old by this point. It shouldn't account for a 30+ degrees Celsius swing in idle conditions. A few screws later, the radiator is loose, and we can pull out the entire AIO. I was hoping to be able to fit this low-profile NH, I think it's an NH9i from Noctua. It's a very sleek, very effective cooler given its size. It definitely outperforms its weight class, so to speak. But I don't have the correct mounting gear for an older LGA socket. I believe this is configured for 1700, and in my infinite wisdom, I got rid of the box with the other mounting gear. I guess I assumed I wasn't gonna use this in any other build from then on out, which was a mistake. I do, however, have another solution. I'm just a bit worried about fitment. This is a Tough Air 110 from Thermaltake. It's actually a pretty good price for a top flow style cooler, but again, I don't know if we're gonna have the clearance for it. Don't mind me just making a few quick changes to this chassis to make it all work. There we go. We can take out this bracket since we no longer need it for an AIO. And we can temporarily remove this graphics card for our new cooler's mounting gear. And while we're here, we'll go ahead and quickly confirm a pretty important detail about this chassis, the fact that this riser cable is actually updated. You see that round circular copper pad there for that metal screw? That's a sign that this is in fact the updated riser. And down goes the replacement with some new thermal compound. Let's see, will it fit in this orientation? No, we need to rotate it. So let's try this way. Yeah. That looks more like it. And we'll tighten with a couple of screws. I also want to cable manage a bit. This really is just a bit messy. I think I'm gonna route these underneath the riser cable and then tuck any excess closer to the power supply. So that would be something like this right here. Oh yeah, that looks so much better. We'll just tuck away some of the excess. Now we can reconnect the RTX 3060, which I visually inspected. It looks a-okay. Not that we should be surprised because, well, we did get a post from it. Let's see if I can slide this in without breaking things. Come on. And just a couple screws to tighten up top. Also, can't forget supplemental power. That's a single 8-pin. Whew. All right, that was a bit of a, a bit of a task. I struggled to get the stock cooler from Thermaltake to fit. There's just not a lot of clearance in this chassis. Most of the time we're dealing with much larger cases, and so I don't have a ton of low profile coolers that are compatible with specifically an older LGA platform at this point as well. So I had to retrofit a smaller, like slimmer fan from actually a Scythe cooler on top of the heatsink, and it actually fits perfectly. The fins in the fan are just slightly recessed as well, so I don't expect we're gonna have any clearance issues with the side panels reinstalled. For now, what we're gonna do is fire it back up as is, all assembled, the only change being that cooler, and we're gonna see if we get another post. We'll also monitor temperatures for a bit in the BIOS to, yeah, just gather a bit more peace of mind before we send this one on its way. I don't expect we're gonna have temperature issues now, just because we've completely removed that AIO as a bottleneck. And okay, here we go. Pretty pumped about this one. I think those temps are just gonna be so much better. Wow, you know what? This is also super quiet compared to that other AIO. There's just so much more space to play with here. So a tower cooler doesn't have to worry as much about long-term heat soak or any sort of clogging or anything. The thin fan is actually doing really well. These scythe fans are super underrated. They are so quiet and they do displace a good amount of air, as you'll see in the BIOS. For now though, we've posted to the recovery screen for Windows again. This is just like kind of a makeshift drive in here at this point. So we'll just tab out, hop into the BIOS, and confirm those CPU temps are much lower. All right, and would you look at that? 32 degrees Celsius at idle. That's a great starting point. I'm gonna let this run for about 15 to 20 minutes. No longer is really needed for an air cooler, especially for it to thermally equalize, and we'll call it a day. And while we're waiting, get a load of how quiet this system is at idle. I haven't tweaked anything fan curve wise. That is whisper quiet. And around 20 minutes later, you can see that temperature looks so much better. Under 40 degrees Celsius, like even if it was 40, 42 degrees, that isn't bad at all for a compact case like the H1. Inasmuch, we left this thing sitting with all of its panels installed for a more real world example of what temperatures should look like, again, under those idle conditions. I don't expect we're gonna have any long-term temp issues anymore with the replaced thermal paste and a cooler that doesn't really have the capability of clogging. I'd be willing to bet a box of gold coins this cooler is clogged, if not in the pump area, at the very least in this block here. It's it's a weird setup, having the pump over here. But the fin stack in this block is most definitely clogged, which is hindering coolant flow and its ability to pull away heat. And a very quick way to tell would be to remove this copper cold plate from this AIO. Underneath that is the fin stack. Actually, it should all be just one solid piece of metal. And if that's clogged, then there's your problem. We've actually made videos on the dissections of certain AIOs that we suspected were clogged, and sure enough, a lot of them had disgusting gunk, particularly in their heat spreader areas. And the solution for this is really one of two things. You could either completely flush the unit, clean out the gunk, and then replace it with some other solution that has inhibitors and things in it for more long-term stability, or you can just replace the cooler, like we did here, with something that doesn't have liquid in it. Well, not the kind of liquid that a AIO has that can potentially clog with time. And as much as I would like to show you in this video what is inside this AIO, we actually have another from an earlier episode of this season of Fix or Flop that I've been waiting to make a video about as well. So we're actually gonna do two in one. We're gonna dissect two AIOs that we suspected were clogged from episodes like this one and see what we find. So this will be a little more content in that one rather than just piecemeal them. The fact that we are running into multiple AIOs with multiple clogging situations is it's worth noting, and I think a dedicated video on it would be pretty useful for folks who might be experiencing temperature issues. It's that time of year again, AIOs start clogging for whatever reason, and this is the second in only a few episodes. And as promised, we're gonna take the time to update his BIOS. The latest revision for this board came out in 2024, so 2 years later, it's going to confirm that the BIOS is compatible with this board and begin flashing. Now, if you're doing this yourself, please do not power off your PC during the update process. You could hard break your motherboard and you'll have to either resolder a new BIOS chip or do some weird flashing to get it to work. The standard way will no longer be viable because you'll never get a post until one of those, again, other options is pursued. So just let this play out. Definitely don't do this during a thunderstorm. And there we are, much better for security and long-term stability. With that, if you guys enjoyed this one, be sure to let us know by giving this a thumbs up. The system is stable. I fired it up multiple times and it loads into the BIOS every single time. Once the owner has his boot drive reinstalled, it should load into, I believe, Pop! OS again. That's a Linux distro. But for now, we haven't been able to replicate a VGA Lite. We get a display, a signal out every single time. I think his 3060 is fine, and this could probably just be chalked up to a thermal issue. I'm glad I let the system sit, and I'm glad we monitored these CPU temps, because if we hadn't, this might have been an issue that popped up again while the system was back in the owner's possession. The last thing I want is to see a text from someone who, whose system we thought we fixed, only to hear, oh, it's actually doing the same thing that it was before, you know, especially when we can't replicate the issue here in the office. So I'm willing to go out on a limb here and say that the temperature issues for the CPU probably had something to do with the picture out. If it thermal throttled, if it shut down randomly and tried restarting and the CPU temperature was just too hot for too long, it's possible that it didn't want to play ball. That said, I don't think long-term that's really a possibility, because the chip will inevitably cool down with time, and then it should just, you know, boot up again without issue until it begins overheating once more. So there may be a display cable problem, or maybe some sort of monitor issue that the owner has on his side that I can't account for here, obviously. The temperature issue, though, was definitely a ticking time bomb, and I'm glad we were able to take care of it in this video with good old-fashioned air cooling and a bit of modification as well. Oh, and again, keep a lookout. The very next video we upload, probably in a week's time from date of publishing, will be the dissection of the 2 AIOs we suspect are clogged. Should be an interesting one. Now, if you enjoyed watching this one, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for your continued support. Consider again the description links if you want to submit your system to be potentially fixed for free in this playlist, as well as our troubleshooting gear and some other stuff down there. Your viewership is again, literally why we can do this, why we can offer this as a free service. And I only hope to be able to continue this into the near future. It's a great position to be in. I'm really in a fortunate place where I can help folks out without charging them, and also create content that you guys want to watch. And I make a lot more money doing this, if I'm being fair, being frank with all of you, than I ever would charging for the labor anyway. So again, it's a fortunate position to be in, and I'm just, yeah, I don't know what else to say other than thank you for your support. Consider sticking around for the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning with me.